when people brag about these from other networks, I'm like, is that all you got? You got rippling. You got the ability to have gateways and brokers. You got a decentralized exchange on the XRP network. You got a hybrid network. You got tokenizing data, debt, agreements. You have the ability to cross into other networks in terms of dApps interacting with each other. You have assets on Ethereum coming to XDC while you got all of this absolute amazing. So that's like debt. Debt out. So people say all the money. What about all the debt? Debt outpaces money 10 to 1. So for every time there's a dollar out there, there's $10 of debt out there that can also be traded and be held as value. And the contractual agreements. I don't think you get this. I've literally had like conversations with like millionaires and billionaires about this, and their mouths just go like they literally like their brains explode. So they're like, wait, so if I had like $500 million in mortgage-backed securities and I wanted to be able to get high level of liquidity right out of it, I can very easily use the rippling algorithm on the XRP network to be able to liquidate them into what? US bonds or whatever instantly without having to go to a central broker? Yes, you can. And you can do that with hundreds of thousands of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars. It's insane. There's a lot to get into. Come on. I'm going to be going over a lot of different topics here. XDC is a hybrid network. That means it has the ability to save public data and private data. XDC is a fork of Ethereum and a fork of Quorum, which means that it has the public ledger of Ethereum, but the private ledger of Quorum. Now, with that, you get all these smart contract platform capabilities of Ethereum. Everything that people talk about Ethereum, XDC is able to do, but it's able to store private information. Now, there's a few other things that XDC is able to do. XDC is able to take data from Ethereum, tokens from Ethereum, and being able to cross them over to the XDC network. But that's not the only thing it can do. It also has a Dazzle bridge to Corda, meaning that you can have Corda dApps interact with XDC dApps quite natively simply because of the native Dazzle bridge. And there's a bridge to Corda that allows for Corda dApps to be able to interact with XDC, mostly in terms of being able to pass funds back and forth. But that also means that dApps on the Corda network can interact with dApps on the XDC network. This ends up being a huge thing because now you have an entirely whole separate network of apps that can be built that can essentially interact with apps that are already on the XDC network. You can take native Ethereum assets and move them over to XDC, like Chainlink or other different assets that can reside on Ethereum, and you can very easily be able to migrate them over to the XDC network. And we'll go over the tokenization of data, debt, and agreements. Now, everybody already knows the idea of like NFT, state, and all those different things. We're all used to that. You're able to be able to tokenize data in a manner to where you can have private data allocated to different users and sold to other users that may need that data. One way you could tokenize data is, let's say I had a smart contract on XDC, and then I had an NFT that was also associated to that smart contract. And let's say I had another dApp, whether it's a core dApp or XDC dApp or whatever, that was generating some amount of data and insights, and it was feeding it to the XDC contract. Well, what I can end up doing is I can create another token that gives permission to people to read that data from that contract and be able to sell that token for people to be able to access that data in that contract. This data could be market analysis data, this data could be survey data, this data could be leads, whatever it is. It can be any amount of data, and you can essentially tokenize two sides of it. Tokenize the ownership side and tokenize people's ability to access the side. Now, what if you're able to take information, save it in a contract, and then just sell the contract? Let's say it was just full of some identity information, like a KYC contract, right? Well, if it's a KYC contract, that means all the data that's associated to this contract can be allocated to this token, and whoever has the token can have access to that data. This could be, like I said, your private information, your ID, private documents about yourself, health data, and because you hold this token, you have access to that information, and you can control the access you'd like to give out with that information. Now, that ends up being kind of a game changer in terms of what you're able to do in terms of being able to tokenize all the different assortments of documents and be able to hold them in a contract and represent them with a token. Let's get into debt real quick. Not only can you create automated debt contracts, so let's say I wanted to loan somebody $100 and I generated a token on one side that basically showed that I own this contract that I'm expecting. Let's say there's a 5% interest rate. I'm expecting $105 from this contract. And I'm able to automate this entire process so the interest rate can continuously compound and grow on top of itself while basically being entirely automated by the contract. And the payments to the contract can dock down the amount of additional payments that need to be paid or paid into the future. So you could pay off your debt through the smart contract. But with that token I have, so if I were able to lend out money and I have a token associated with it and I'm expecting a $105 return, well, I could potentially sell that token for $101 to a separate person, in which they're able to hold that token and be able to get more and more returns based off of the returns of this contract. And if this contract essentially continues gaining more and more interest, the interest payments will go to the new token holder, while the previous token holder was able to sell it at profit, or at least a short-term profit, while the secondary owner will essentially hold on to it until it fully matures. This is something that everyone can see the data. You can't tokenize information if everyone can see the information. So being able to do this adds a lot of value to the XDC network, simply by the fact that you can tokenize debt in a smart contract and information in a smart contract, and then allocate the information, or allocate the funds accordingly based off the automation of the contract, and be able to sell tokens of that data and that debt to secondary parties. Now, the third one I'm going to go into is contractual agreements, right? So let's say, for instance, it's not just me lending you money, it's us making like a trade deal or something. And we can tokenize both sides of the trade deal to really show the obligation. And in doing that, the holder of the token is essentially the one that's holding their side of the obligation. And in doing that, that's just a means of being able to prove that, hey, this is what I'm expecting from the contract because I'm the token holder, and I can sell that expectation from the contract by being able to take the token and sell it to a third party. That third party will now have whatever was in this contract, whether it was just some sort of agreement, whether it was, let's say it was a debt contract like we said before. And I wanted to make sure that I believe this debt contract may potentially fail. Well, normally that would go to collections because you believe that they're not going to end up paying it back. Well, what you can end up doing is selling that token, and that token can represent the obligation of the contract, and they can go to court and say, hey, I am now the possessor of that contract. The person on the other end of it owes me money, and I'm essentially going to use this token as a means to show proof that I'm owed whatever in this contract, whatever it may be. And what ends up being really cool about this is no other technology can do this with the EVM and Solidity. So remember what I was saying before about how you can have assets from Ethereum migrate over to XDC? Well, all of those different dApps and assets and all those different things can now operate in that whole entirely natively as long as they're written in Solidity. And information coming from the core dApps can essentially fill up the XDC contract in order to be able to take outside information from other applications and be able to tokenize them in certain contracts on the XDC network. Now, you can tokenize data by saving data in the contract and then creating associated tokens that represent the data inside of it. You can tokenize debt by creating contractual agreements and create tokens on either side, one showing that you owe the debt and the other side saying that you are owed a certain amount of debt. And the token basically represents that you're the beneficiary of whatever that is, or you hold the liability of whatever that may be. And then there's tokenizing agreements, which is any contract that you would otherwise make, you can essentially run in a smart contract, tokenize each side, like I said, the liability and the obligation, and essentially use that as a means to show ownership that you are the owner of this side of the contract, or whatever it may be. Now, let me get into XRP, which is going to be a little bit different. So XDC is a smart contract platform to allow for dApps to be able to, one, be interoperable with each other and execute off of each other, but also for you to build apps and applications for people to use. It could be a social media application. It could be an application for managing contracts. It can be any type of app you can think of. That's what XDC is for. XRP, not primarily for dApps. XRP is for liquidity. Now let's get into XRP. So with XRP, you have the rippling algorithm and it's a decentralized exchange. These are the two most important things about XRP. You would typically need liquidity pools to be able to provide liquidity to different parties and different assets. But because of the rippling algorithm, you don't need liquidity pools. The algorithm is able to associate the funds to the appropriate party in real time. So what ends up happening is, let's say you have party A and party A has a stock. And party A wants to buy a commodity from party B. Well, party B is not just going to accept a stock as like capital or collateral or whatever. They're going to accept dollars. But on the XRP ledger, as they're making this transaction, the stock is going to go onto the XRP ledger, which is a decentralized exchange. And that stock is going to be traded somewhere in some order book, somewhere out there for somebody that has dollars, that is willing to exchange dollars for that stock. It's going to make that trade and then complete the transaction by taking those dollars and associating that to person B. This happens at infinitely levels deep. So here I have a three-way transaction, but it can be four-way. So you can have a stock get translated into Japanese yen, get translated into Mexican pesos, get translated into dollars, get translated into whatever you're buying. It just keeps on going, keeps on going, keeps on going, keeps on going until you essentially So you essentially meet your final path for being able to exchange the asset. With this rippling algorithm, you're able to not only be able to exchange assets on-chain, but you can potentially exchange assets off-chain. Now, it's not just with the algorithm. Now, with XRP, there's a thing called the gateways. Now, with gateways, it's like having a broker in the middle here that's able to help broker deals between two parties through the XRP ledger. So let's say you got, dude D over here, and he's got some XDC, and he's got an XRP contract, and then you got dude F over here, and he's like a fiat bank with some XRP. What you could potentially end up having is, let's say person D has primarily their assets valued in XDC because they're dealing with their assets in XDC. They manage on the XDC network, and they may hold a lot of their capital that they may deal that's not in XDC on the XRP ledger. Let's say person D needed to pay the bank $40 or whatever. Person D can essentially just exchange on the XRP ledger their XDC derivatives. They can have whatever, like they can have USD dollar derivatives or just XRP, but they can exchange that for USD derivatives on the XRP ledger to the fiat bank. Now, let's say the fiat bank is like, hey, look, I appreciate the US dollars that you gave me, but I need, dollars to be able to pay bills and be able to pay my employees. Well, what this bank can do is this bank can actually take those XRP dollars, those XRP stable coins, go to this broker over here at this gateway, and he can say, hey, look, I'm willing to exchange you XRP assets for non-XRP ledger assets. And he'll go, okay, pay a teeny tiny fee, and you're able to swap that out. This goes in every which way. So let's say I had a fiat person over here trying to pay the person in XDC. They pay them in dollars. They get it on the XRP ledger. They're like, okay, cool, but I need XDC because that's how I run my applications. Well, he can essentially do the same thing. Exchange the XRP for XDC derivatives on network, give them to the broker, which the broker will take the XDC derivatives and then send him XDC essentially in real life. And essentially what that allows them to do is this gateway allows for different parties on that both operate on the network but also have assets that aren't on the network are able to exchange their assets through a third party with the XRP ledger to allow for easy liquidity, but at the same time move those assets on-chain, the off-chain, and off-chain, the on-chain. It goes the other way around. So if I had a bunch of XDC, I may go to this gateway, exchange that XDC for XRP through the gateway, and then pay the broker who may go back to the gateway and get the dollars out. So what ends up happening is we end up going through this process of exchanging value, but on either end, I may be valuing my assets in XDC, and he may be valuing his assets in dollars. And from our perspective, it seems like maybe an extra step, but that one extra step for everybody keeps there from being a zillion extra steps for everybody how it would traditionally be done. Because if you wanted to have fiat person A and XDC person B over here, they would both need to have liquidity in both assets to be able to conduct trade with each other. But if they were going through a gateway, and this gateway was essentially operating on the XRP ledger in terms of having their assets, they're able to basically provide as much liquidity as they need in any asset, operate on the XRP ledger for the primary purpose of being able to provide liquidity on XRP in multiple derivatives, whether it's XDC derivatives or USDC derivatives, and then be able to take those on-chain assets and associate them to whether it's an off-chain dollars or off-chain or other chain assets. They're able to give those actual assets for whatever fee they want. They can exchange those assets for real-life assets, while at the same time, each individual party is only dealing with their primary asset. They're all dealing with the XRP ledger, but if I was dealing with XDC, I wouldn't have to deal with dollars in order to make sure the person I'm sending to gets some form of dollars. And if they want it on the XRP ledger, that's fine, but even if they wanted to swap that out, they're able to go to this gateway over here and very easily swap that out. Now, one thing I really wanted to hammer in is XRP is a derivatives platform. That's truly what it is. Every asset on the XRP ledger other than XRP is just a derivative of an off-chain asset, and that derivative can be swapped through a gateway for that off-chain asset. And like I said, XDC is a smart contract platform. XDC is everything that everybody wants Ethereum to do, but it's faster, cheaper, with privacy, multiple bridges, and you're able to have dApps on Corda interact with dApps on XDC, tokens on Ethereum interact with tokens on XDC, and being able to swap back and forth, being able to bring more liquidity, more assets, more transactions, and basically more interoperability. Because if there were a ton of dApps created on Corda, well, if there was no bridge between the two, there'd be no mechanism for them to be able to communicate. But because there's a bridge, all of those transactions that would otherwise be isolated on that network are able to cross over into the XDC network and be able to interact with XDC dApps, or at the very least interact with XDC assets. what if you created a token of some data on the XDC network, and then I took that derivative and brought it through a broker and put it on the XRP network? So now I can potentially take assets that are on the XDC network, manage the derivatives on the XRP network, and then be able to use a gateway to interact with those otherwise siloed assets. The XRP ledger is a derivatives platform. So it doesn't matter if it's a derivative of a data token, a derivative of a debt token, a derivative of a smart contract, a derivative of a CBDC, a derivative of stocks or bonds. It can be literally anything. So if you were operating on XDC, for instance, and you had a ton of data tokens that were stationary, not doing anything, people may just hold value in the data token knowing that they could sell it to somebody else. And in doing so, they may have derivatives to have excess liquidity to be able to reach other people actually being on the XDC network. Even to the point where if, let's say, there's this fiat bank guy over here, he may be able to hold a derivative of a tokenized smart contract on the XDC network on the XRP network, and then what he can essentially do is go through the process of swapping. So he takes that derivative, swap it through the broker, goes to the XDC person, redeems that derivative, and then basically what they're able to do is say, hey, look, if I have a derivative of a token on the XRP network and I want to be able to redeem it on the XDC network, what if I sent a payment to the broker saying, hey, send this token to this address? He takes it, sends it to that address, he takes it, sends it back to the broker, and then he's able to cash out without even touching XDC. Even though he was dealing with XDC data derivative, he never touched it. He went through this broker gateway to be able to redeem the token and be able to swap out the value without actually holding the token at all. So a lot of people talk about ISO, and what does that mean? ISO is just a formatting tool to allow institutions to be able to communicate with each other. But in this regard and being able to communicate with each other, you may have institutions that may only be able to use these ISO formats to be able to keep track of these different assets that they otherwise wouldn't really have anything to do with. And it's not that they don't want to manage these assets, it's just that if they have to manage each individual asset in a different format, then they may have to manage hundreds of assets, if not tens of hundreds of assets. And the biggest thing about that is, well, it's not convenient for the banks. It's easier for them to have a simple format to be able to manage multiple different assets with multiple different banks all over the world without having to manage, or each bank having to manage their own set of formats for every token that they interact with. But Quincy, XRP does all these things to maximize liquidity. What about XDC? It's a trade finance tool, right? What about maximizing liquidity there? Well, you're able to maximize liquidity by automating trade agreements. That's the biggest thing there. And most trade agreements now are just managed by lawyers and managed by labor and businesses, where if you can automate certain facets of these agreements, you're able to get a faster, better transaction times for being able to enforce these contracts, where before they would otherwise have to be managed manually. And in XRP is a derivatives decentralized exchange that maximizes liquidity. So XRP basically means no liquidity pools. This means automated trade finance tools and automated digital agreements. These are not the same thing. Liquidity is just maintaining the ability to have easy access to move tokens from one party to another while having the fastest means of being able to take that token and move it, really. Where here it's just automating these different tasks that you would otherwise be manually enforced. XDC, it's a hybrid network, public-private ledger, fork of Ethereum and Quorum, and allows for different bridges to Ethereum, to Corda. Ethereum assets can come onto the XDC network. Corda dApps can interact with the XDC network. You can tokenize data, debt, and contractual agreements and represent them as different NFTs for different access and automate the regulation of those NFTs. So XRP, derivative platform with a rippling algorithm to maximize liquidity. That is a decentralized exchange. Rippling, like I said before, if you wanted to make an exchange between an illiquid asset and potentially even another illiquid asset, you could eventually scour the network to be able to find the shortest path to be able to make those exchanges by lining up the order books. And with having gateways, you can potentially do something similar to this off-chain by being able to make different payments in whatever asset you'd like while being able to go through a broker to cash out in the asset that you're primarily dealing with. So if I'm dealing with XDC, I could have an XRP account that's able to deal with other people on the XRP network, but go through a gateway to be able to redeem back into XDC so I can be able to manage my assets in XDC. Where if I was dealing in fiat as a bank, I could do the exact same thing where I'm managing a lot of my assets on the XRP ledger, but if I need to pay my bills in dollars, I'm able to go through the broker and be able to manage my liquidity that way in terms of being able to get off-chain assets. Let's say I was a bank, right? And let's say I wanted to take $1 billion worth of my assets and issue them on the XDC network. Boom, I mint $1 billion of whatever asset that I would otherwise have sitting in a drawer somewhere as a stock or bond or whatever, put it on the XDC network. The second I did that, guess what? Nothing would happen. Whoa, what do you mean nothing would happen? Well, that's because you got to do something with that asset first. The asset sitting on the network not doing anything doesn't do anything. But now there are $1 billion worth of tradable assets on the network. So let's say you had $1 billion worth of those assets and you sold all of them. Well, that means somebody out there had to get $1 billion worth of XDC and buy those assets. So what ends up happening is those assets trading on the network will contribute to the demand for XDC to buy those assets. So what ends up happening is when you mint the assets, it may not do anything, but as people trade the assets, it will essentially create more and more demand for XDC because you need XDC to buy the assets. And it works like that with XRP too. So if you want to mint $10 billion on the XRP network and then sold it, well, guess what? Someone needed $10 billion of XRP to buy it, which means the amount of liquidity in XRP would need to increase to accommodate the liquidity demanded to buy those assets in the first place. And then as those assets get traded more and more, because you need the foundational coin to buy the asset and trade the asset, or at the very least, you need that to have the maximum amount of liquidity. You can potentially have other assets that you can buy and sell on these networks, but the main native asset is going to have the highest amount of liquidity than any other asset on that network. So XDC will have the most liquidity on the XDC network. XRP will have the most liquidity on the XRP network. It doesn't matter if you print $1 trillion on there. In order for someone to buy one, they have to use XDC to buy the first one. And this is where a lot of this demand is going to come. So as people buy them, the demand to buy those assets will increase the demand for the token as a whole, meaning that, and that's the thing, let's say I minted $1 billion of assets onto the network, and then I just sold it. And the next day it sold again. And the next day it sold again. That's $1 billion of volume that's now onto the network because people are buying these assets that are worth something. This also works with data. That's kind of the thing that freaks me out about data. People go, oh, Quincy, they're selling our data. Yeah, they are. They're making bank. Imagine that contributing to the volume on the network too. And imagine dApps also contributing volume to the network, because as people are engaging with these dApps, they need XDC, or potentially they need XDC or potentially any other native token to use those dApps. So as people are using more and more dApps, there's more and more demand for the token to use those dApps, meaning that the price has to go up simply because there's more demand for the asset to interact with the network and the assets that are on the network. Yeah, I think it's the coolest thing ever. So when I see people screaming like to the moon, I'm like, yeah, sure, cool, whatever. But, you know, what about to the data, to the debt, to the contractual agreements, to issuing assets and trading them on the network and building all this demand for the native asset to do that? What about all those things, dude? Like, that is insane. And then being able to take these assets that would otherwise be native to the XDC network and then being able to move them to the XRP network for maximum liquidity to be able to exchange with other people that otherwise wouldn't be offering on the XDC network. Like I said, if you got a bank over here, that bank's not going to come over to XDC to buy the XDC, but if I listed that token as a derivative on the XRP network, well, then anybody on the XRP network can now interact with that token, even though it was native to the XDC network. And as they go in and out, that's still demand. So it's just like, anywho, you got rippling, you got the ability to have gateways and brokers, you got a decentralized exchange on the XRP network, you got a hybrid network, you got tokenizing data, debt, agreements, you have the ability to cross into other networks in terms of dApps interacting with each other, you have assets on Ethereum coming to XDC. What if all these assets on Ethereum said, you know what, fuck Ethereum, you know, I like XDC because the fees are better, and all the stuff we always say, you can very easily have that too. So we have way better talking points to prove how cool these technologies, outside of just the fees, dude. Like, the fees are just the tippy tip cherry on top of the iceberg, while you got all of this absolute amazingness. And I think these are just the tip of the iceberg of these domains. Tokenizing data, there's data itself is a multi-trillion-dollar industry. You got Apple, you got Google, you got Amazon, you got Microsoft. All of these companies can tokenize their data and contribute to the volume on the network by tokenizing their data. Debt out. So people say all the money. This is gonna be one last thing. People say all the money. What about all the debt? Debt outpaces money 10 to 1. So for every time there's $1 out there, there's $10 of debt out there that can also be traded and be held as value. And the contractual agreements. Every time you make a contract with somebody, they can be passing funds with each other. Those are funds that are being passed on the XDC network that are able to now that also contribute to the demand on the network that are now able to be traded on almost programmatically on the XDC network. That make this look like nothing. Like, when people brag about these from other networks, I'm like, is that all you got? Oh, you got private data, bro? Or how about tokenized debt? Or how about the rippling algorithm? No one ever talks about this. At least with XRP, the rippling algorithm means no more liquidity pools. I don't think you get this. I've literally had like conversations with like millionaires and billionaires about this, and their mouths just go, like, they literally, like, their brains explode. So they're like, wait, so if I had like $500 million in mortgages or mortgage-backed securities and I want to be able to get high-level liquidity right out of it, I can very easily use the rippling algorithm on the XRP network to be able to liquidate them into what? US bonds or whatever instantly without having to go to a central broker? Yes! Yes! Yes, you can. And you can do that with hundreds of thousands of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars. It's insane. There's a lot to get into. Come on! Like this alone, the tokenizing data and the rippling algorithm should be like literally like your biggest talking points for XRP and XDC. You will absolutely slaughter people in arms. People will be going, what? Are you telling me that you can potentially move billions of dollars without any liquidity pools? What? And you can tokenize data, which means that you can take the entire assortment of data on the internet and tokenize it and trade it, adding to the volume on the network. Holy cow! What does that mean for the price? I don't know, but it means something insane. I know that much. Like tokenizing debt. What the rippling algorithm means for the banking sector. Woo! People are like, oh, what about the Nostro Vostro accounts? Yeah, that's one little aspect of that. Imagine freeing up the entire derivatives market in terms of being able to take any derivative and using it as instant capital to be able to exchange for cash on demand. That's essentially what on-demand liquidity is, except Ripple adds on a lot of extra fluff. But that rippling algorithm is essentially what on-demand liquidity is. Literally. But, whew. Anywho. Something I do plan on potentially trying to build a bridge between these two networks with the XRP sidechain and being able to potentially have, just like I stated before, being able to take XDC derivatives. Well, with the XRP sidechain, I can potentially make a bridge with the XRP EVM compatible sidechain and then be able to programmatically move those derivatives onto the XRP network without having to go through a gateway. This is a goal of mine. It's something that I would like to see into the future. But XRP, XDC, I like Algorand, I like XLM, I like Quant, and that's the thing. Guess what? I like Ethereum, guys. I run with the I work on the EVM all day long. So Ethereum's fees suck, but that doesn't mean I don't like the foundation of the technology. It really set the standard for what we're doing. Yeah, I think I'm gonna end the stream there, and I'll see you guys on the next one. It's definitely a lot of fun.